Seth S. Tannenbaum is an associate professor of sports studies at Manhattanville University. He earned his PhD in American history at Temple University in 2019. He is here to speak about his first book, Bleacher Seats and Luxury Suites, Democracy and Division at the 20th-Century Ballpark by the University of Illinois Press. Seth, Seth examines American changing understandings of urban areas, inclusion, and body politic. He analyzes how team owners use ballpark designs, locations, and amenities to keep fans coming back to the park among significant changes in cities and in leisure consumption patterns. We promise Seth no trash talking since he's a lifelong fan of the Philadelphia Phillies. Welcome to Baseball and BBQ, Professor Seth Tannenbaum. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's quite lovely to be here.
Well, I started on the book. I like the Phillies. I know Jeff. That they were very good to us back when we first started doing this show. We got to go in there. We got to interview Greg the Bull, Luzinski, have his barbecue, get a personalized tour of the stadium, and they gave us seats and everything. So the Phillies are up there in my book, and you've got Kyle Schwarber, who's wow. The guy really rocks it. But so anyway, Seth, also before we get to the book, your history is interesting. How you became a professor at Manhattanville College, teaching sports. If you could just give us a little bit of a background.
So I went to graduate school with the intention of writing about something totally different. I was going to write about American conscientious objectors during World War I, excuse me. And there were, about 2,000 of them. So I wrote a nice paper, eventually got the paper published, but I couldn't find anything else to do after that. So I was looking around, and I had taken a class on consumer culture history, and I had taken a class on food history. And I started to think about where they intersected. And this would have been 2012, 2013, somewhere around in there. And as a baseball fan, I was increasingly aware of the way that ballpark food was becoming more of an item of conspicuous consumption. Like, it was something that you would Instagram. It was something that you would brag about being able to eat this 2-foot hot dog. So to me, that was the intersection of consumer culture and food history. And I started this whole project by planning on writing a history of ballpark food concessions. And pretty quickly, I realized that you couldn't talk about the concessions alone without talking about the whole experience. And then the whole experience sort of became the dominant thread, but the food is still a key element in all of the chapters. And I graduated in 2019, and I worked in history departments. I had 1-year positions in various history departments where I was just teaching American history, and sometimes I'd get to teach a little bit of sport mixed into that. But then this position opened up at Manhattanville for this program called Sports Studies. And I wasn't aware of sports studies as a standalone undergraduate major. I knew it was a field of study, but not as a standalone undergraduate major. So I was, this seems like it's right up my alley. I applied for the job. I very fortunately got it. And now I teach all sorts of really fun and interesting sport-based courses. I teach a spectators and fans course. I teach baseball in American society. I teach urban sport. I teach our intro class. I teach our American sport history classes, all sorts of stuff like that.
That sounds like fun. I wish I was back in college to take your classes.
We should re-enroll.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll take the tuition dollars.
Yeah, right. Just as expensive as baseball stadium tickets. Speaking of that, bleacher seats and luxury suites. I mean, it was a very, I wouldn't say fun book, but it was a very interesting book and an important book, I would say. It's really interesting stuff in here. Gets really down to, how stadiums changed over the years, the demographics. I want to start at the beginning because you really talk about hot dogs, polo grounds, and you talk about in the beginning, and this guy's name always comes up when Len and I are speaking to history people, John Montgomery Ward. and he had a
Hmm.
friendship with Harry M. Stevens, and Harry M. Stevens, who I didn't know was way back in the 1800s. I mean, I would go. I remember going to Shea Stadium and go to Harry M. Stevens concessions. I mean,
Hmm.
tell us about the hot dog and Harry M. Stevens and the Polo Grounds.
Yeah, absolutely. So Harry Stevens is a British immigrant who comes to the United States via Canada in, I think, the 1880s. All the dates are in the book, so I don't have to remember them because I wrote it down. And he eventually winds his way up to a steel mill. The steel mill shuts down because of a strike. He starts selling books door to door, and he wanders into this baseball game. And you know, like the stereotypical Brit at a baseball game, he's got no idea what's going on because the scorecards don't tell him who's actually playing. So he says, well, I'm a salesman. I'm going to get into this by offering to sell scorecards, and I'll, offer the team that I'll do it for cheaper than whoever it is they're doing, and I'll do a better job. And he sells ads on the scorecard, so he's making a profit before he even sells a scorecard to a fan at a baseball game. And from there, he pivots into food. He meets John Montgomery Ward when I don't remember which iteration of the various New York teams, if this was a Players League year or not a Players League year, where he meets John Montgomery Ward at a game in Pittsburgh, strikes up this conversation. John Montgomery Ward is a Renaissance man, to put it mildly, union organizer, attorney, pitcher, shortstop, hitter, all of these things. Um, and he parlays this friendship into an entree to the Polo Grounds, where he writes to the owners of the Giants and says, hey, I'm friends with Harry M. Stevens, and this is what I do. And he gets the concessions contract there. And this is where the facts of the story stop. And now I'm going to tell you the myth, but I'm going to do it very clearly so that I'm not lying to all of your listeners, right? So the myth is that on a cold April day in 1901, Harry Stevens cannot sell his ice cream to the sold out crowd. So he says to his employees, and really his sons, because he has like five sons and they all work for him. I mean, there are other employees too, but really his sons. And he says, go out into these neighborhoods in Upper Manhattan around the Polo Grounds. Get me all the German sausages and all the Italian rolls that you can find, and we'll sell something red hot to the customers. And he names this thing Red Hots, and supposedly there's a cartoon in the newspaper about it where they're called Dachshund sausages, but the guy can't spell Dachshund, so he just calls them hot dogs. And this is the supposed origin of the hot dog. And there it is at baseball with this immigrant who lifted himself up by his bootstraps to become a millionaire, friends with John Montgomery Ward. He mentors Babe Ruth when Ruth is young. Wonderful, lovely story of Americana all wrapped up in baseball. But that myth isn't true, right? Hot dogs existed as a dish before then. The term hot dog existed to describe them before then. Um, Stevens absolutely is responsible for popularizing hot dogs at baseball games. And hot dogs at baseball games makes them popular nationwide. But he didn't invent it. He has this really, really, really important role. It's just not as much as his sons exaggerated to willing journalists after he died in an attempt to bolster their father's reputation, but also their current business during the Depression, that it was invented the game. But it does make a nice story.
It does. It certainly does. Len?
So I have to disagree with my co-host, and I don't like to do that. And I'll tell you why. So the book is called Bleacher Seats and Luxury Suites, Democracy and Division at the 20th-Century Ballpark. We are speaking to Professor Seth Tannenbaum. I'm tell you why I disagree with Jeff. He said the book isn't fun, and I disagree with that.
Oh, okay.
Now, to me, history is fun. And I guess Professor, you'll agree with that. And this is sports history. What could be more fun than that? What I love about these books, and you did this, and good baseball books do it, is there are things in here, like Jeff said, John Montgomery Ward, the whole thing with the Polo Grounds and Henry Stevens, and you know, who also I didn't realize went that far back, because I remember Shea Stadium and having that also. So all of those things, if you're a baseball fan, this book is a lot of fun because there are things you're going to learn in here that are amazing. So Jeff, I'm sorry that I had to,
Well, some of
disagree
it, I guess,
with.
was kind of Seth, and don't take this the wrong way. Maybe uncomfortable. I mean,
Yeah.
you do mention white privileges
Yes, that
and
is
the
true.
separation of the races and
Yeah.
the way that the ballpark is
Yes,
configured to keep people away from each other. So,
it's thought provoking. It's
Yeah,
that's a good
thought
word.
Jeff,
provoking.
That's
Yeah.
a good word.
I
Yes.
certain I certainly was not offended that you said it was interesting and not fun. There are baseball books that are supposed to be fun, right? A book about the 69 Mets is going to make both of you very happy,
Yeah,
right?
Yes.
Right?
sure.
That's a fun book for you to read. A book about the
Yes.
2008 Phillies is a fun book for me to read.
Right.
And there's no problem with that. But that wasn't, yes, learning is fun. And that's why I'm still in academia, why I've never left college all these years later, is because I love to learn. But I didn't set out to write a fun book. If it's fun, that's great. I set out to write an interesting and thought provoking book. So
And
I
you
really
did.
appreciate both
You
of what
did.
you're saying. Yeah.
It is thought provoking, and Jeff, you're right. There are things in here that you think to yourself, "Wow, look at my life now." I mean, the way it used to be, it's just a terrible thing. Um, but so you bring up this. There's of course Polo Grounds, Yankee Stadium, the Astrodome, uh, um, the
Dodger Stadium.
Dodger Stadium, and
Mm-hmm.
Camden Yards,
Mm-hmm.
right? You pick those particular stadiums. So this is probably one where Jeff and I could I could ask you this question. Jeff and I can go run out, grab a cold one and come back because it's probably a very long answer. But you pick those particular stadiums.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, so it's a combination of a couple of things. One, all of those stadiums are important and trend setting. They establish patterns that other people follow in one way or another. But there are other ballparks that are also important or trend setting that could have been included. You want to look at the first real concrete and steel stadium, that's Shibe Park, but I could have written about Forbes Field too. I could have written about ballparks that still exist from that era. But some of those have been written about, and more importantly, as a historian, those ballparks have sufficient archival documentation that I could research. So the Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium don't have as much typical archival documentation, right? There aren't, engineers' records and, the papers of the Yankees owners, the colonels writing back and forth to each other. Those things don't exist anymore, but they're in the capital of baseball and the capital of American media at that point in time. So there's lots of insights there. And there are some documents, especially about Yankee Stadium. Their financial ledgers are at the New York Public Library, which is a really fun research experience. Their stadium logs, which is what they used to write down all the fans they had to kick out of the ballpark for various reasons from the late 30s, those are at the Baseball Hall of Fame. So I could delve into those and I could look at, well, so who are they kicking out and where are they kicking them out from and why? And use that to understand the experience. For Dodger Stadium, I was very fortunate to get in touch with the employees of Peter O'Malley. So Peter O'Malley is Walter O'Malley's son. And I know there are going to be New Yorkers listening to this, so you're not supposed to say that name aloud. It's like, right. Anyway,
Just don't say
Peter,
it three times because
don't say it three times. Got it. Fair enough. I'm done with that. Peter O'Malley inherited the team from his father, who shall remain unnamed, and owned the team, I think, from 1979 until 1997, if I remember correctly. But anyway, he sold the team, but he retained all of the documentation from those two generations of ownership. And his employees, for a long time, Peter O'Malley must be in his 90s now. Anyway, his employees for a long time maintained control over who had access to them. And I was able to connect to them through another scholar who had connected to them. And they mailed me 3 or 4 2-inch thick priority mail envelopes of documents, original memos of Dodger employees, stadium plans, clippings files, all sorts of things like that. And this is, I wrote back to them and I said, my goodness, this stuff is incredible, but you have to donate it somewhere, please, right? Let it be accessible. And actually, Jeff, when we were at the Hall of Fame, I was in May, I was talking with Claudette Scraffer, who's the archivist there. I said, Claudette, Claudette's someone who's worked there for a long enough time that when I interned there as a junior in high school, she was working there. I won't say exactly how long that is because that would out her for being however old she is. Anyway, I said, what are you working on? She said, well, I'm just about finishing up the Walter O'Malley papers. So they donated all of those papers to the Baseball Hall of Fame, so they will be publicly accessible. The engineers' papers of the Astrodome are at the University of Texas at Austin at the Briscoe Center for American History. And there, you picture a file box, like a banker's box, like 1.5 feet long. They have 10 of those full of all the documents from the Astrodome. So that was a long time to go through. And then Camden Yards, Janet Marie Smith, who is very much in charge of that design, is very active and will talk to people. She sent me some lovely documents, but she's also donated a lot of her Camden Yards related stuff to the Baseball Hall of Fame as well. So that's, it's that combination of these places are important, they're trend setting, they have a decent nationwide representation, but I can, as a historian, I can write about them using archival documents, and that's really important.
Yeah, Janet Marie Smith is a true pioneer when it comes to stadium, construction. She was involved with many stadiums. So yes, I'm very familiar with her.
Yeah.
We've talked about how stadiums were in the city. They moved out to the suburbs, and now they're moving back in the city. But it was where I guess mass transit, and then you had the vehicles. So talk about why they moved and came back.
Yeah. So as baseball, and this is where I think some of the thought provoking or the uncomfortable kind of stuff that you all were talking about comes into play, right?
Hmm.
It's sort of as baseball fans and as middle-aged white men, we should probably recognize that like baseball has long geared itself towards trying to appeal to us. And that means trying to create an atmosphere that is something that people like us, people who look like us at least, are going to want and is accessible to where they live. So in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, a lot of middle and upper class white Americans are moving out of cities and into the suburbs or into the Sunbelt South. And baseball owners are fiscally conservative. They don't, very few of them are interested in taking risks to draw new fans, right? You can probably name them on one hand. Baseball owners legitimately interested in taking risks to draw new fans. So these owners are going to go where their traditional fan base is. And as their traditional fan base moves to the suburbs, owners are looking for ballparks that are either in the suburbs or are suburban accessible, meaning that they're right off highways with lots and lots of parking. So places like the Astrodome are not actually in the suburbs, but it's right off the highway and it has 30,000 parking spots for a stadium that sat 40 something thousand when it opened, right? That's a ridiculous ratio. But by the 80s, by the late 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and if you read baseball, there's a whole genre of books of fans who travel to all the major league ballparks in one year and then write about it. Those are fun, right? We talked about fun books; those are fun, but they're also really telling, right? These guys review the ballparks and they say what they like and what they don't like. And it turns out by the 80s, these folks are saying, my goodness, I hate all these cookie cutter ballparks. I like these old ones. I like that they're in the city, but I also like to be able to drive. And owners are astute enough to realize, and Janet Marie Smith is astute enough to realize, that if we can create ballparks that have the parts of the old ballparks that people want and parts of the new ballparks that people want, that we're going to be really accessible. So they re-engage with the city. And when Camden Yards was first built, right, the outfield is basically all open and the skyline just sits right there. It is unmistakably Baltimore. Whereas Memorial Stadium, it looked like a stadium. But, I grew up going to the Vet. The Vet looked like any one of 7 different stadiums that if you were inside, you had no idea where you were. So they come back because the fans want something different. And the mass transit that is set up at these ballparks is often connecting them either to the business centers of the city or to the nearby suburbs, right, to where these people live. So yes, you don't have to drive, right? You take a look at Baltimore, right? You can walk there from downtown Baltimore to Camden Yards, but you can also take the light rail from the northern suburbs, which are a statistically wider portion of the area around Baltimore than many other neighborhoods, right? That connection, which is built just at the time the ballpark opens, is still doing those things. Yes, absolutely, it is engaging with the city, but it's engaging with the city in a way that's designed to continue to attract that same kind of fan base. Again, because baseball owners tend to be fiscally conservative in thinking about who they can appeal to come to games.
Seth, one of the each stadium you kind of have, like you talk about women at each stadium, the concessions at each stadium. Let's talk about the concessions because this is the baseball and barbecue podcast, so we are in love with food. We already kind of addressed the concessions at the Polo Grounds. But what about the other stadiums? I know you mentioned with the Dodgers, you mentioned the Dodger dog, I believe. So tell a little bit about the concessions at each of the stadiums that you discuss.
Yeah, so Yankee Stadium's concessions when it opens are not wildly different than the Polo Grounds. It's a Harry M. Stevens production, like most other things in Major League Baseball in the Northeast at that point. What is a little bit interesting is that it seems like Harry Stevens as a company, not as a person, because was deceased by that point. When Negro League games took place there, they tried in a somewhat ham-fisted way to sell food that they thought would appeal to Negro League fans, to black people. So they sold fried pork rinds, which they were not regularly selling for Yankees games. But Yankee Stadium gets seriously innovative when Larry McPhail buys the team and constructs the Stadium Club underneath the stands, which is, it's a 1940s cocktail lounge with fancy food. And that's really the first time that happened at a ballpark. It's out of the view of everyone else. I think somebody in the New York Times said it's out of the view of the hoi polloi, which is a very good way to describe it. But you look at Dodger Stadium and it becomes about branding, right? They want everything to be smacked with the word Dodger on it because they're trying to ingratiate themselves to Los Angeles. And Los Angeles becomes enamored with anything that says Dodger. It doesn't hurt that they were initially called footlong hot dogs and somebody brought a tape measure and realized they were about 10 inches long. So they had to, come up with a different name, and they came up with Dodger dogs, and I can't remember if this made it into the book or not, but I was talking with a guy, with an Aramark executive, maybe a decade ago, Carl Middleman, and he said, well, Dodger dogs are terrible, but you can't change the flavor because people get all up in arms if you mess with them, but my goodness, they're awful. So I think that's, part of that tradition is very baked in. But Dodger Stadium copies a lot of what goes on with the Stadium Club, with its own restaurants. And then the Astrodome takes everything and, as the Astrodome does, blows it absolutely to the moon. Like, that's the whole point of the Astrodome, is to go completely over the top. And the Astrodome has 5 different restaurants and a Japanese-style steakhouse for the Sky Dome, where people get golden spatulas and to serve themselves, and you can't get hot dogs in the sky boxes, which Alan Shepard, the astronaut, Alan Shepard, right, is a skybox owner, and he or leasee, nobody owns them, and he wants hot dogs because it's a ballpark. You got to eat hot dogs at the ballpark, right? It's this thing that connects us with all the fans, regardless of where you're sitting. You go to the game, you eat a hot dog. So he starts smuggling in hot dogs and having his skybox concierge prep them for him. And word gets to the Astros ownership, and Hot finds us. You can't bring in your own hot dogs, but you can buy them from us, at bulk rate, and you can make them in your skybox. So even, you know, in the most elite, most luxury of places, you have to have that hot dog to make it all fit in with that long-standing pattern. And then when we get to Camden Yards is really emphasizing local flavors, although not with beer when it first opened, which was very upsetting to a lot of Baltimoreans that you couldn't get Natty Boh in 1992 at Camden Yards. But, they really pioneer, Boog's Barbecue has been copied, and in many different ways. Bull's Barbecue is almost directly a copy of that. It's just another large outfielder, first baseman who likes barbecue, who was around for the glory days, and sits on his stool at the ballpark enjoying the game and talking to people about food, right? So that really pushes all of that forward.
I'm going to get a little uncomfortable here because you talk about black fans at Yankee Stadium. You talk about the black buying power, and that the
Hmm.
Yankees were, ahead of the curve there because they were the neighborhood not far from Harlem, but they didn't have any black players. So
Hmm.
that is very. You get into that here. You talk about the importance of black buying power. So could you talk
Yeah.
about that?
Absolutely. So in the Depression, this is maybe the one time that baseball owners, as a collective group, start to think outside the box about how they're going to draw different people. Right? We get lights, so the working class people can come. We get we get the All Star game, so that we can do bells and whistles and bring all sorts of other people in. Um, but they're not willing to break down all of these barriers, and the Yankees in particular, and then the Giants as well at this point. But I had shifted away from talking about the Polo Grounds by the time we got to the Depression. Um, they are acutely aware that Black Americans love baseball too, and that there are a large number of Black Americans in close proximity to Yankee Stadium. So they are interested in attracting Black fans, but they don't want to mess with the norms of white supremacy that, well, they ascribe to as an organization, but also, and importantly, many of their fans also ascribe to, right? You're not going to be able to sell a product to people who were raised in a white supremacist environment, raised in a racist environment, who live in a racist environment, if that product is anti-racist, right? They're going to be like, oh my goodness, I don't like this. It makes me uncomfortable. So, yes, you can bring in Black fans, but the tiers of Yankee Stadium mean that they're unlikely to sit near the most wealthy of white fans. And if white fans are uncomfortable sitting near Black fans, oh, don't worry, you can pay more to sit further away from them. And you can really see the limits to how far the Yankees are interested in going to attract Black fans. In an incident that I talk about in the book, with a Yankee outfielder, his name was Jake Powell. And Powell was doing a live radio interview before a game at Comiskey Park in Chicago. And Powell was asked in this live radio interview, hey, how do you stay in shape in the off season? And Powell said, I commit acts of police brutality against Black people. And that not at all the words he used, not even close to the words he used,
Mhm.
but that's what he said. First off, Powell was not a police officer in the offseason or any other time in his life. He just sort of said this off the cuff, right? And Black fans in Chicago and New York were justifiably outraged. There are protests and boycotts, and Powell gets suspended by Commissioner Landis, of all people, right? This is so bad. This is so racist that Commissioner Landis, who's in charge of keeping the color barrier intact, has to suspend you, right?
Wow.
That's a lot, right? That says a lot.
Yes.
So he gets suspended for 10 games. It's the first time in baseball history that someone's been suspended for saying something super racist. And But the Yankees keep him on the team for the rest of the 38 season. And they've re-signed him for the 39th season. And he's like their fifth outfielder. He's hitting like 200, 220 maybe? I can't remember. I looked it up at one point. He's not a vital cog, but they keep him on the team because they're not willing to listen to this outrage fully. They make Powell, and again, this speaks to the understandings of well, the lack of understanding of people at this time, right? They make Powell take an apology tour. So they send him to newspaper offices in Harlem, black newspapers, two weekly black newspapers in Harlem. They send him to talk to their editorial boards. That makes a lot of sense. They also send him to the bars in Harlem to buy drinks for people. That's their way of saying, oh, this is what black people like. So it's just that lack of understanding from a group of executives and a group of players who are basically surrounded by people who look and think and act like them. They're not having this opportunity to interact with different people, and they structure the ballpark such that their fans very rarely have to do that, while at the same time trying to take as much money as they can from everybody who they can, but keeping that social hierarchy intact.
We are speaking with Professor Seth Tannenbaum. The book is Bleacher, Seats and Luxury Suites, Democracy and Division at the 20th Century Ballpark. Just as we were talking about the African Americans in the ballpark, there was also another group of people that you mentioned with the various ballparks, and each ballpark did their thing to get them involved, and that's the women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so baseball owners have long wanted to attract women to the park, but they haven't really wanted women fans. And that may sound like a contradiction in terms, but here's what I mean. When Ladies' Days first got started in the late 1800s and early 1900s, because it'll keep the men under control. They won't curse as much. They won't drink as much. They won't boo the umpire as much because they won't want to behave that way in front of respectable women. When Ladies' Days continued, and when radio comes about and when games are broadcast on the radio, it's fairly easy for middle class women who at that point in time are largely homemakers to follow the games every day. So they become legitimately interested in the game and knowledgeable and fans. And Ladies' Days comes back. But the way that baseball owners are marketing to female fans is not as though they are fans who are interested and knowledgeable about the games the same way male fans are. But they're marketed as though they're only interested in baseball because they might meet an attractive male partner there, either a player or another fan or something like that. And that really sort of remains the norm at Dodger Stadium. It's not appealing to women as baseball fans. It's appealing to women as, oh, this is a whole family atmosphere. Let's bring the whole family there. Even your wife will have an okay time. Right? And the same thing really at the Astrodome, right? It's not seen as a place where women are anything other than sort of going for like a cocktail party, right? Not for the same thing as a baseball fan. But when we get to Camden Yards, and this is where I saw some interesting differences, and I have to imagine that some of this is due to the influence of Janet Murray Smith, that the Orioles don't market to women any differently than they market to any other Orioles fans. It's come to the game, come to this beautiful ballpark, let's root for the Orioles, right? And that does begin to change, although that doesn't mean that the experiences that women have at the ballpark have drastically changed, right? There are a number of accounts, and I don't talk about this as much in the book, but I assign it in some of my classes, of these really knowledgeable and dedicated baseball fans, female baseball fans, who talk about the fact that every time they go to the ballpark, some man, treats them like they don't know what they're talking about at all, like they have no idea what they're doing. So that is still something that is very much baked in to the baseball experience. Will it change with the Women's Professional Baseball League? Has it changed a lot? Well, the answer to the first question is maybe. The answer to the second question is yes, it definitely has changed, but it's not commonplace. It's not regular that when we as a society think of baseball fans, we think of women.
Ironically, I was watching the Baseball Night in New York, which they have here on SNY TV in New York, and they had a panel of three women and one man, one gentleman on the show, talking about baseball
Yeah,
in New York. So I seen it has changed over the years. Now I'm getting up there in age, but I remember it was just a male dominated industry. But now, look, they were in newspapers. Laura Albany's does a fantastic job in Newsday. I mean,
yeah,
Abby, I can't pronounce her last name, but she does a great job at the Daily News. And they're on
yep.
TV. Look, Susan Waldman, who we had on, is just a pioneer. So
Yeah,
it is changing. I've seen it change.
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That it is changing, and yet go to next time you're at a game, right? And this is the sort of the thought provoking part of my book. Like, look around and see who you see, right? And take that in. And as fans, what can we do to change that, right? Well, we can just expect that people at a baseball game are there because they're baseball fans,
Hmm.
and we can act accordingly. And it's not a big change, right? It's not a, oh, is this your first baseball game? Oh, do you know what a double play is? It's, hey, look at that double play. That's a really good double play.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you're talking to, right?
Hmm.
Whatever. They're sitting next to you. There must be a baseball fan. They're at a game.
Exactly. I've been to a lot of stadiums. Haven't been in all of them. Trying to get there, but and I cannot afford the great seats down there and the beautiful views or whatever. But I've noticed there's at City Field, which I go to the most. There's a moat-like space where you cannot get into that area without a ticket and like an escort or something. I would love to get there that one day, but I've seen that over the years, and it's just the way it is. But is that also not just baseball stadiums? I've noticed in arenas too, where there's only
Yeah.
you can only go to a club area where you can get those better seats and have the amenities that goes with it. So it's just not stadiums; it's just all venues.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, right? That we've seen the kind of economic separation at baseball parks, at almost all other sports, at almost all other things that we can possibly pay money for, right? That there is always an option to pay more to have a better version of whatever it is. But what's different about baseball, what makes it important that this stuff exists in baseball, is that almost none of these other things have been described as all American, have been described as a place where Americans come together as equals. Right? Nobody ever described airline seating as a public space where we all intermingle as equals. Right? That's not a thing, right? No one ever described going to the opera. Oh my God, I don't know who goes to the opera anymore. No one ever described things like that as like an all-encompassing democratic, small d democratic space. But baseball has long, long been described that way. And I was just, where was I reading this? I was just reading a book. I was prepping for a class, and I was reading a book that was talking about the one of the coalitions of business leaders and politicians in Minneapolis that was working to put together funding to build Target Field in when did that open? 2010, I want to say, right? So we're talking about maybe 20 years ago. This report came out, and they basically said baseball games are a democratic place where everyone is interacting as equals. And I just watched the Phillies just played at Target Field, so like I'm kind of familiar with what the thing looks like. It looks like every other ballpark. It's got luxury suites. It's got all this division. It's got that, right? So this rhetoric of baseball as this egalitarian space, it's not just something 100 years ago, right? We still have parts of this baked in. So that division, you say, yeah, this happens everywhere, but it stands in stark contrast to the rhetoric when we're talking about baseball.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so let's go back to a subject. Well, I want to know the story here. So you have section we said on the Houston Astrodome. There is a picture. There are two. One of the things about the book, it's not a picture book, obviously, but there are some very good. There are some very good pictures in this book. So,
Thank you.
um,
I
yeah,
worked hard
good.
on that. That was a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm sure it was because I'm sure you can't put a lot of pictures, but you put some good ones. So when the Astrodome was built, they had a groundbreaking ceremony, and there's one picture here that has African Americans in the picture doing the groundbreaking. Jeff is showing it. Of course, we'll have the YouTube viewers that'll get to see it, but the audio won't get to see it. So Jeff was just holding it up. So I guess what everyone will have to do is go buy the book.
There you go. I support that.
And then the opposite page has a picture with the groundbreaking and with a lot of white people in it. And the first picture that I mentioned you have was not published in the weeks after it was taken, but the other picture with all the white people was published in the days after it was taken. Tell us a little. There's a story there. Tell us about that.
There is, and you really buried the lead because you didn't say what they were breaking the ground with, which is the really fun part of this whole story.
Oh yes, include that. Yes, please. That was cool.
So, in order to get the Astrodome built, the Astrodome is a publicly financed stadium. Technically, its name is the Harris County Domed Stadium, which means that it needed to be supported by in a bond election. So the residents, the citizens of Harris County, Texas, which is basically the same as Houston. There's some slight deviations along the borders. It doesn't really matter. Have to go to the polls in a special election. So not like a regularly scheduled November election or a primary election, a whole separate election. And they have to approve the bond measure for the county to take out the bonds to then sell the bonds to raise the money to build the stadium. And in Texas, in 1961, which is when this first 61, when these two elections happen, Texas, well, the grandfather clause has been overturned by the Supreme Court many years before that. So there's no longer that policy where if your grandfather couldn't vote, you can't vote. Texas did not have literacy tests, unlike other southern states. And although they did have a poll tax, it was a relatively meager $1.50, if I remember correctly. So many black residents of Harris County could afford to pay the poll tax and therefore vote in what was predicted to be a relatively close election. And at this point in Texas, in Houston, most public accommodations, so movie theaters, restaurants, train stations, most of these places are segregated. And in order to get the electoral support of black Houstonians who are eligible to vote in this election, and to vote in a bond election, you had to own property in Harris County because it's tied to the property tax. It's a whole complicated thing. Anyway, so there's a sizable enough black voting population that the owner of the Astros, or the future owner of the Astros, he then is a part owner of the Houston Sports Association. Anyway, Roy Hoffines goes to a civil rights leader in Houston and says, look, here's the deal. He goes to several of them and says, here's the deal. I promise you the dome is going to be desegregated, but I can't make a public announcement about it. But you need to tell all of the people in the black community in Harris County that this is going to be the case, so they'll vote for it. Because it'll open up and it will be desegregated, and that will help push the other areas of Houston to desegregate. Now, at the same time, Hoffines is getting all sorts of pressure from the National League. The National League says to him, well, you know, you can't have Willie Mays and Hank Aaron staying in segregated hotels. It's 1962, although in spring training in Florida, many black players were still staying in segregated hotels. But the National League says, we can't do this. You can't have that happen, so you need to push for that. So this is sort of a part of that whole process. And at this point in time, the Astros aren't even a thing yet, right? They're going to be the Colt 45s. So all of their space age shenanigans are all Wild West shenanigans. So at this groundbreaking ceremony, rather than, use a spade like most sane human beings might do at a groundbreaking ceremony, Roy Hoffines decides that the answer is to have dignitaries fire revolvers loaded with wax bullets into the ground. So those photos that Leonard was talking about have gentlemen holding revolvers and pointing them at the ground. So the first photo is it's the various owners of the Houston Sports Association and public elected officials, all white, firing their pistols into the ground. Each on the front page of all the daily newspapers in Houston. At that point in time, there are three. And then three members of the black community that were absolutely fundamentally important to garnering electoral support are given the opportunity to also fire the same wax loaded revolvers into the ground. And it is a separate but equal ceremony, equal in air quotes there for those of you on the audio only, for a facility that is supposed to not be segregated. So it's deeply ironic in that way. And I was absolutely thrilled to be able to get both of those photos in because, I mean, wax bullets into the ground? Who thinks of that?
Uh, Seth, we really appreciate your time. I have one last question, which I'm going to be honest here. I stole from your little video that you have on your webpage because I think it's a great
Okay.
question.
All right.
What do you want the reader to walk away from this book thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I want people thinking harder. Not all the time at baseball games. Baseball games are a great place to let loose and not think at all. But sometimes think about what's going on around you and why it looks the way it looks and whether or not there's anything you can do to make it look different. Right? Think about the things that have allowed you to become a baseball fan and whether or not those things are available to everybody and if you can make them more available to people. I'm greedy. I love baseball and I want more people to love baseball because I love baseball. That makes me selfish, that makes me greedy. I'll take it, right? So I want people to think about how they can make more people love baseball. And one of the ways to do that is to make more people feel welcome at the ballpark, regardless of what they look like, where they're from, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, for me, that's really what I want people walking away from this book with.
Well, you know what? I've been a baseball fan my whole life as well. I will be going to Citi Field tomorrow night, and I will be doing exactly that. Uh,
All right.
you can go to SethTannenbaum.com. You have your own website. The book is available from University of Illinois Press. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes Noble, or go to your independent bookstore, order it. Anything else you want to tell Seth?
Yeah, you can order it direct from the press at a 30% discount if you use promo code S26UIP. So order it from the press and not from that giant book eating conglomerate that really
Yes, we support our local bookstores.
not. Yes, do support your local bookstores. They've been lovely to me. Other than that, I've got a talk coming up in Philadelphia in October. Talking to a couple of Sabre chapters coming up as well, and the New York Giants Preservation Society in September. So I'll be around, and most of this stuff gets posted on my website. So if you want to come hear me talk, come chat with me, check it out. And I know that probably a bunch of folks listen to this are in the New York area, so I got to do a plug for my oral history project that I run with my students. We do sport fan oral histories, and I'm always looking to recruit senior citizens 65 and up to take part in that program. So if that is something that interests you and you're in the vicinity of Manhattanville University, shoot me an email, contact me through my website, whatever it is. We'd love to set that up and love to get you in for an oral history.
Okay, I'm about 8 months from 65, so I might be contacting you then. And I'm usually on those New York Giant Preservation Society's talks as well, so I'll be looking forward to seeing you then. Seth, thank you very much for being on Baseball and BBQ.
Said thank
Thank
you.
you. It's been an absolute pleasure.